It's good to see each of you. Last week was just an incredible time of celebration. I don't know about you, but I was just thrilled to hear the different reports of just some of the areas in which we have seen God at work in the life of this congregation. And that was just some of the areas. If you missed last week, and you missed out, it just goes to show that you need to be here every week, all right? So it was a fun time last week, and we got a chance to look over our shoulders a little bit and celebrate those wins that God has given us. Now this week, we're going to kind of turn the page of looking over our shoulder and looking a little bit into the future, looking a little bit about what's next. We're studying the life of David in our series right now, and we'll continue through September. And David is such a man. His life has always intrigued me. As a matter of fact, the very first series that I did here at Boulevard was a several-month series over the life of David, because his character just is intriguing and such a help to us as we want to be followers of Jesus. And this man was a humble shepherd. You know, he was a giant slayer. He was a poet. He was a songwriter. He was a flawed man. He was a great warrior. And he was a legendary leader. And God used him in a tremendous way to take this little nation of Israel and turn it into a world force. Now, this transition from Saul the king to David being the king was a rough transition, primarily because Saul did not want to let loose of the kingship when God said, hey, I'm going to replace you, even though God had been preparing David for a number of years to be able to do that. It was like 18 years between the time that David was anointed to be king till the time he became king. A few years ago, there was a series of leadership events that was brought about by a national magazine, which they took churches all of the same size, leaders of those churches together, and brought them together for kind of some roundtable discussions. And each of those roundtables were led by a pastor who was pretty seasoned, generally in one of the mega churches here in the United States. And they led different discussions. It was a great time of talking back and forth. We found that in churches our particular size have some unique challenges that we have. We're kind of like awkward teenagers, you know. You want to do all these big things, but you don't have the resources that some of the mega churches do, and some of that nature. And it was just a refreshing time. As we neared the end of that second conference, the second year, we were out in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we were at this round table, and the guy that was leading, kind of moderating our discussion, I'll be honest, he was a guy who was at a mega church, and I didn't really care for him that well, all right? Just, you know, I'll confess it. He just asked too many biting questions, you know? And so we're going around talking about some of the things that we were going to implement when we got back, and he turned and looked at me and he said, how long have you been to that church in wherever, Muskogee, you know, the Okie from Muskogee? This guy's the Okie from Muskogee. I'm going, all right, just cool the sarcasm there, you know. And I told him about how long I'd been there, and he said, do you love your congregation? And I said, I do. I really do like the people. And he said, do you think they like you? And I said, on some days, yes. I think that. And so he asked me a couple of questions, because we talked, one of the big things we were talking about at that time was transitioning through different things. And he said, I've been counting the number of transitions that your congregation has been through since you've been the pastor there. And he said, you know, you guys relocated not long ago. And he said, that's pretty a good deal. But do you really love your church? And I thought, where is he going with this? And he said, and I said, I do. And he said, okay, what plans are you making with your leadership for succession? And I said, I don't know. I don't think I'm old enough to think about those sorts of things. And he said, do you know when Jesus is coming back? I'm thinking, I'm tired of playing 20 questions. Get to the point, guy. And I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, then you better start planning. Just like you're going to plan for the second coming, you need to start planning for things in your church, because transitions, as you've already talked about, and successions always happen. They just come with regularity. And if we don't pray about them, if we don't plan for them, then it leaves the church that we love in a mess, you know. And so I got to thinking about that more, kind of challenged me. I went out and bought about 5 different books. You know me, I love books, love to research things, and began studying just about different churches that have gone through succession planning and what works, what doesn't, what are some of the challenges in the midst of that. And one of the things that I discovered, that if you plan for succession rather than just allowing it to happen, there is a greater success rate of the church continuing on and being strong. That whenever you are at a congregation for a number of years, you know, I started here when I was 12, and so when you're there for a number of years, they build up a kind of a culture around who you are, which is kind of a bad thing for you guys. But so I kind of woke up to that fact, and one of the things that each of these books talked about is that you as the pastor, lead pastor, needs to initiate those conversations. And they suggested that you get with one of your trusted leaders and sit down and begin the conversation. So I did. I talked with one of our leaders. We read one of the books together. Then our elder executive group, which consists of our chairman, vice chairman, and secretary of our elders, we met together, went through the book. Then all of our elders did the same thing. And one of the things that we just kind of learned several things by going through the process, and we wanted to, sometime in the future, we wanted to understand that we had a better success of keeping the mission of our church. That quite often happens is when a pastor who's been there for a long time steps aside, that people, they hire just the opposite of the person who just retired or stepped down. And that causes kind of an implosion in the congregation over time. And generally, the pastor, the guy who follows someone there for a long time, is like 9 to 24 months before they leave. That's not good for the church. And so we begin to set up and think about a succession plan, or eldership. And so the first thing we realize is, what happens if something, like I'm playing golf with Steve Moss, and he tees off and hits me in the head with the golf ball, And if you've ever played golf with Steve Moss, you know that that's a distinct possibility that could happen. And so, what would happen in an emergency if Steve hit me in the head with a golf ball and I became incapacitated for a period of time, or he killed me, So I increased my life insurance for Tria and quit playing golf with him, to take some safeguards. And so the eldership said, you need to do kind of a time on task, because in every job description that we have, that's just kind of the general overview, right? How many of you on your job descriptions, how many of you do more than what your job description says? Yeah, everybody. Those of you who are not raising your hand, I'd be aware you may not be with that company much longer. But as we did those time on tasks over about a 6 or 8 month period of time, I then categorized all those things and put them together in kind of an emergency letter. So here's my key duties in case something happens to me, and who needs to pick them up, and we kind of update those each year. The second thing that we did was to begin putting together a broad stroke succession plan. And so that included, we realized, first of all, that we needed to increase the amount of leadership within our congregation. And I realized through some of the things I did that for years that's something that I did, but when we moved here in the church, it was such a increase of things happening that I wasn't investing the time in developing younger leadership that I had done for years here in the congregation. So during that time, I began a mentor group. We're just starting our 3rd mentor group of younger people who have the potential for leadership in our congregation so that they can grow. The other thing is our elders are putting together right now a leadership curriculum where they will begin to mentor people so that we have a leadership pipeline going. The second thing in the succession plan that we talked about is that I have primarily been the number one communicator here. Normally, for years, I have preached anywhere from 40 45 to 48 Sundays out of the year is what the amount of times that I've preached. And one of the things that every one of these books talked about is the need for sharing the teaching, that there is one voice, one coordinator of what the content or the mission is, but several voices doing that. And I'm sure you've noticed that over the last 3 years that I have lessened my time as being in front as the primary communicator. And I know some of you have said to me, gosh, have you quit working at all? You know, if you're not preaching, you know, you're off 7 days a week now. Now, while that may be funny, it's a real misunderstanding of what a lead pastor does. And so this year, I'll preach over the year about 28 times, and then different staff members. And what we've discovered, Steve is a tremendous communicator. Jim has become a really fabulous communicator for us, and you're hearing different voices, and you're being strengthened because of that. The third thing of this broad stroke plan was that the elders had to start thinking about who, if I were to get hit in the head with the golf ball, or at some point to step down, who would be the person to take that position. And so they've been working on that for the last 3 years, 3.5 years, of who that person might be. Did we bring someone in from the outside? Did we have somebody here that's already on staff that could step into that role? Now, all this is to say that our eldership has been praying and planning, because I believe, and I think our eldership believe also, that God not only works right now in the moment, but he is the one that sees the future, and he knows about the future. And we can count on him doing planning a year or so, or even longer than that, because it's no surprise to him what's going to come about. And sometimes we think, well, God only happens if I pray right now, and it happens right then. Well, no. Actually, he's been working all along behind the scenes, and we don't always know about it. So what we got to do is get in touch with what God's mind is for the future. So what's next? We've been doing all this work. What's next for us? Here's what's next. On January 1st, 2020, I'm going to step down from being the lead pastor here at Boulevard. I am not resigning, and I am not retiring. You had some hopes, but they're misplaced. But I'm going to step down from being the lead pastor here at Boulevard, and there will be a new lead pastor, that will come on the scene. So to tell you a little bit more about that, Ernie Franklin is the current chairman of our elders, and Ernie's going to come out. You are going to come out. You're not going to leave me here on stage by myself, are you? And share some things about that. Ernie.
Thank you. Yeah. Good morning, y'all. The succession planning is something that we do a lot in business to figure out who's going to take over after the boss retires or whatever, or gets promoted or gets fired or whatever. And having a succession plan in life and in business and in church is a very responsible thing to do, because it shows how much you care for what you're doing, and you want to see it succeed and go on after you've left. So James is not leaving. But there's also many examples of leadership succession in the Bible. Moses was succeeded by Joshua. David was followed by Solomon. And Jesus, although he really wasn't succeeded, he did say that, Peter, you're going to be the rock on which I build my church. So that's the type of things you look for in succession. So God has a plan. And although the leadership may change, the mission will not change. We don't always get to choose who our successor is, but when we do, it can be a really good thing. This succession plan was initiated by James 4 years ago to begin the developing and planning that you see coming through today. His love for our church and his love for God inspired him to do this and make sure that we do things right. Over the last 4 years, he talked about the team praying and planning and talking. And our plan transition is also a lot easier on us as the stakeholders, the congregation. It's a lot easier if it's planned than if it's abrupt. It also gives us the opportunity to assure success, because we're just not turning everything over and going a totally different direction. James has chosen, along with the elders, Steve Moss to be the lead pastor, and James is going to take on the role of executive pastor. Now, Steve started as a youth minister in 1983. And over the years, a lot of us have had contact with him, and he's made a tremendous difference in a lot of people's lives. He's a really good communicator. He knows the gospel and preaches well. And how he's touched us with all the things that we've done in our journey here at Boulevard, whether it's family ministry stuff at Robbers Cave, it's Vision Night, and his family has really been engaged with it. Dawn has touched so many children in this church. It's unbelievable, mine included. And the journey which they've gone on is tremendous, and it carries on and on and on. And if you look at a couple of his boys going out and fulfilling the Great Commission, you can see it in the work they do with CIY and work at OSU. So he's a really good choice. The reporting structure will shift with the staff reporting to Steve. We don't plan any additions or subtractions. We look to job enrich the staff that we have and give them more things to do. The main thing that you will see is James will be preaching less and Steve will be preaching more. That can be a good thing.
Good morning. Hey, I want to talk with you just for a few minutes. I would just tell you that I'm really excited about the role that God is leading me into. When I thought about what I wanted to communicate to you all as a family this morning, I would tell you that I was probably more nervous about this just few minutes than I have been most sermons that I preached to you in the last couple of years. And I finally realized that I really didn't want it to feel like a sermon at all. If I had my rather, it certainly would have been one of those conversations where I would have pulled you aside one at a time, sat on the back porch and drank a cup of coffee with you. And then I realized that would have been a lot of caffeine. And so here's where we're at. You know, we're here. We'll just pretend for a few moments that the coffee has been poured, and it's just one-on-one. And I just want to speak to you heart to heart for just a moment. James came to me about 3.5 years ago. We sat down in a booth at Subway one day for lunch, and he began to talk with me at that time, 3.5 years ago, about the possibility of this, and said, hey, this would be a big thing. This was what it would mean for you. I need you to begin thinking about this and praying and seeing if it's what you believe God is leading you to. And I will tell you that my initial response was a little bit likened to when Dawn and I first found out we were going to have our first child. You know, and if you've been there before, it's like, we're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby? And I, initially it was like I was so excited that then, with the child, I realized, hey, I'm still in college and neither one of us has a full-time job, and I can't even spell the word insurance. And it was a little bit like that with this job. I was like, I'm going to lead. I'm going to lead. And all the things that are a part of leadership and those tasks and duties and responsibilities and the questions and those kind of things begin to come up on me. And if you would have had a chance to listen to my prayers 3.5 years ago, if you go to read my journal, you would see that there was a lot of Exodus 3 and 4. Exodus 3 and 4 is when God comes to Moses and says, hey, I've chosen you to take my people out of Egypt. And Moses just barrages God with all these W's, the whys and the whats and whens and who am I's and all those kind of things. And really my prayer and journal reflected those things. And then after a few years, it went from kind of a Moses thing to kind of what I've always felt like Joshua felt like after he had followed Moses all these years, and finally he became the man. And here he is following what I consider probably the finest, the greatest leader ever in the history of mankind, who had pulled this amazing task off of leading the people out of Egypt across the wilderness and then preparing them for the promised land, the Joshua complex, I call it. Now you want me to follow Moses. And I want to tell you, folks, if two things about me I'd like you to know. One is this, that I, without trying to be comparative, I would tell you that I have as much or more respect for James McCracken than anyone sitting in this auditorium. I have worked with him side by side in every situation imaginable in ministry for 34 years. I have the deepest respect for who he is as a Class A leader, as a man who communicates, has communicated clearly, who has built great things, who has a heart for global mission and has led us into doing amazing things for a church our size in global missions, who has done amazing things in the reconciliation between black and white in this community and its leadership, who has consistently made decisions through storms here at Boulevard over at times with a steady wisdom, and who continually puts a steak on the plate week after week after week so we can chew it and swallow it and process it and grow as Christians and know more about God's Word. My appreciation and respect for this guy is great, and I am incredibly grateful that he is going to continue to be here serving, bringing his gifts and all that he has to this ministry. Second thing I would just ask, I would want you to know is this, is that really after, in all those years of that I've been here since, Dawn and I have been here since '83, really never thought about being the lead pastor very much. I mean, that some people would think that was, probably I'd be lying to them, but that really is the case. And I don't know if this is politically correct or not, but honestly, I've always just kind of seen James and I riding off into the ministry sunset as Lone Ranger and Tonto. And which is kind of an interesting picture because I can't ride a horse. But so this was all new to me. And I'm learning a lot of things. But one of the lessons God has had me learning is this, that he takes great pleasure in pulling me, out of areas of self-comfort and self-confidence so I will lean on him. That's a lesson for me. I hope maybe it's something that you might learn from too. And I know, folks, I know this. I know there are some of you who are type A's who are just waiting for the guy ahead of you to fall so you can grab the bull by the horns and go. For me to share some of these weaknesses and fears is probably a little disarming to you. And you know what? I'm honestly, I'm cool with that. I'm good with that. Because what I want you all to know as much as anything is that I recognize somewhat of the immensity of this task. And I did not come into it with any confidence. I came into it with fear and trembling. And it has been God over a period of 3.5 years teaching me that he has placed in me what is needed, and that he has prepared for me. And over a period of time, I realized, hey, you know what? God was not surprised by this. He saw this coming way before me. He's had me in a training school following James for all these years so I could learn what spiritual ministry and leadership looks like. He's had me following and hanging out with the elders and rubbing shoulders with some great leaders that we have in this church. And some years ago, someone said this, and it stuck with me. God will not call you to something that he has not equipped you for. If he calls us to something, he will put the tools in our hands for us to do that. And that is true of me, and it is also true, my friends, of you. And I also rejoice, because I got to tell you, I love the team I work with. I love the team I work with. They are committed to what we are committed to. They are committed to doing the work. They are passionate about what they're doing. There's a sense of teamwork and unity in our staff that is absolutely just enjoyable and exhilarating in every way. So I've spent the last couple years just really trying to abide in Christ in a way that I never had before. Learning to lean into him so that I could say, all my confidence is in you. My confidence is not in me. My confidence is not in my personality, only that God gave me this. And the gifts that I have, God has placed those things in me. And folks, I've come to this conclusion, if nothing else about this role, that it is not my role as a leader to have a vision for this church. My role in this role, my responsibility in this role is that I would listen to God to hear His vision for this church. And then I would be obedient to that on a personal level, whatever that means. And then I would communicate that to you as best I know how, regardless of what your response to that vision might be. And sometimes you won't like it. So over the last couple of years, I've drank a lot of coffee with leaders. I've watched James closely. Spent more time just watching what he does and how he does it. Last September, some of you hear us talk about this sometimes, but a lot of you probably may not know, really, we plan our sermon series here a full year in advance, okay? So in 3 weeks or so, we're already studying, we're already thinking about it, we're already plotting things on paper. In about 3 weeks, James and I will go off for a full 5 days. We'll camp out in a cabin somewhere, all right? And we'll plan out the entire sermons for the year 2020. All right, and it's something that he has done for years. Last year he invited me into that. And I just got to tell you this. Just a kind of a difference. And that is that we're at this cabin, and we spent about 8 or 9 hours on Monday, and we've been working really, really hard. It's mentally exhausting. We get to Monday night, and it's Monday night football. It's like the third week of September. And I'm ready for Monday night football. I'm ready to put everything aside. And so I'm wanting him to engage with me in Monday night football. Okay? Put the Bible aside. Let's watch some football. And I look over there and I'm trying to have conversations about Monday Night Football, and he's got his computer and he's researching all this stuff. And I'm like, holy mackerel. And by Wednesday, I am mentally so smooth, so worn out. I got nothing left. And I said, man, I am so glad we are about done. And he looks at me and he goes, we got 2 full days of studying left. And I was like, I about threw myself in the lake. I was like, who is this guy, We're different. We're different. Our spiritual gifts are very, very different. And again, I'm grateful to have him at a side. Well, folks, I've also, as watching James, watching our leadership, I have also spent a lot of times in the last year or so looking at our church. Looking at our church. What do we need to be doing differently? And looking at our community. What does this community need, and how can we touch this community as a church? And I've looked hard at every single letter of our mission statement. Why we exist. And I'm going to tell you, folks, if you want to forget everything else I've told you today, that's all right. But I'd love you to walk home and be able to get in your car and remember this. Whether you have been here a week or whether you've been here 50 years, you need to know this. We exist to help people find Christ. And we exist to help people follow Christ. That's it. And that's it. And everything else we do might be good, but if it is not helping people find Christ and help people follow Christ, then it needs to be tweaked or it needs to be burned. And we add our own DNA to that, and we say, and if you've been here a while, you can say this with us, we are a caring community of Christians, right? Committed to reaching the unchurched and helping them to become followers of Christ. But it really comes down to this. We exist to help people find Christ and to help people follow Christ. That's what we're about. And man, we can't improve that mission, can we? I mean, that's a Jesus commission. You can't improve on Jesus' mission, but we can improve on how we do it. And we're improving on how we do it, and we're going to continue to get better at how we do it. And some of my most exhilarating moments, I will tell you, in the last year or two, have been sitting with our staff and sitting with our elders. One of our staff members the other day, last year, came and said, hey, you know what, we've been doing Pumpkin Palooza, but it's losing a little steam. Let's see if we can't change it. And we came up with our backyard bash, and we'd had about 800 or 900 people, and all of a sudden last year we had like 1,400 people. But last week at staff, she said, you know what, we've got a lot of things we need to change to make that event better. How can we get the gospel better into that event? Not just more people, not just more candy. How can we get the gospel into that event? We're going to make it better. We're going to make it point. We're going to sharpen the blade. Our leadership, our elders have been talking recently about developing leaders. And so right now, as James alluded to, they are actually working on a full year intense discipleship and leadership course so that we can raise up leaders in this community so we can send them out into our community. You might recognize that our worship has changed a little bit. It's just you all are engaging in worship better. That's not a surprise because our worship team has worked hard. They're shortening our playlists so we are more familiar with the songs. We like that, whether you even know it or not. I could go on and on. Areas that we are doing better. Our graphics and our videos have taken a step forward. Our staff are working on our core values. And folks, I'm excited about the fact that James is going to continue to work in an executive role here. He's going to be using his administration gifts to help me because, wow, that's a super weak area for me. He's going to continue to teach because he is a gifted speaker, a gifted teacher. Tony's going to be continuing his work with his pastoral ministry because he adds so much shepherding the herding sheep here. And we're going to ask him to do some other roles because he has a gift of service. And I want some of our areas of serving ministry to be kind of around his or on his plate so he can bring that heart for serving and that purpose to those particular ministries. Jim's going to continue to do student ministry. But I've already begun to invite him into serving more and doing more communicating here because, wow, we benefit when that young man speaks, right? He is a tremendous communicator. And God has used his life in some amazing ways to bring grace to this church. We benefit from that. Jim is a clear thinker. It's amazing to me how much he cuts through things. And he understands our target of 35s. And so he often says to us, hey, you know what? I just don't think that's going to work. We need to be thinking in this way. We want to hear more from him in that way. Carrie is extremely committed to the vision and the mission of this church and is always learning and is willing to do anything and we ask. Amy loves those kids and those infants and preschoolers in Chua Land. Is making changes back there to make it better. And Kelly has just been here less than a year, but is just doing a tremendous job with our BC kids and has invited so many of our adults into that area so those kids can be well taken care of. And folks, listen, you have a role too. Because don't think for yourself that this is about us who happen to be on this stage sometimes or just on staff. This is about you and your role. And God taking you out of your comfort zone and your area of confidence and using the gifts that he has given you for the call that he has given you in your life. I'm excited. I'm excited about this for so many reasons. And one of the primary reasons is because I've looked at the community and I've looked at our country and I'm seeing the same things that you're seeing. Divisiveness, a lot of anger. I'm seeing housing that people shouldn't live in, but more than that, I'm seeing eyes and hearts of people who are broken. Look at the eyes of the people behind you in Homeland. Look at their walk. And you'll see despair, and you'll see hopelessness. And I know, folks, we have the answer. We have the answer. And the answer is not me as lead pastor of Boulevard Christian Church. The answer is Jesus Christ. And I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to say to you folks that we are the answer. We are the answer because God's word is clear that we are the body of Christ. Listen to this black gospel group the other day called the Porter's Gate. Incredible music. And they have a song called Christ Has No Body Now But Yours. No hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he sees, and yours are the feet with which he walks, the hands with which he blesses. Christ has no body now but yours. Hey friends, listen, this transition is not about me. It's a new role. And I believe, I can say to you humbly, I believe God has prepared me for this. I believe now that God has given me the gifts and surrounded me with people who have the gifts that I do not have. So I'm going to answer that call. But you have a call to answer too. And my role in the body of Christ is no more important, folks, not for a moment, than your role. I may be an elbow and you may be an ankle. We all have our job. He is the head. And through that, we have the answer to the needs and the despair and hopelessness in this community. Folks, our mission is clear. Our mission is clear, and I would remind you that men will change, but the mission remains the same. We are here to help people find Christ, and we are here to help people follow Christ. Not about me. It's not about you. It's about God in us doing his thing, teaching us what he wants us to know. He has called you. He has chosen us for this mission. Not just me, but you, and you, and you. In Judges 6, the angel of God comes in the time when God's children are being oppressed and attacked by a powerful enemy, the Midianites. And the angel of God comes to a man by the name of Gideon, and Gideon is so fearful of the Midianites that he is actually down deep in the wine press so he will not be seen, doing just hiding basically. And the angel of God comes to him and he says to him, "Mighty warrior, God has a job for you." Gideon has never fought a battle, to my knowledge, not recorded in Scripture at least. And he is fearful. And yet God comes to him and calls him this, mighty warrior, not because he is, but because he will be. And God always calls us not what we are, not where we see ourselves. God calls us by name of what we will be, what he sees us being, folks. That's an amazing thing. And he is calling you and I to something that we may not understand and we may not have the confidence within ourselves, but I would say with God, Psalm 108:1, all my confidence is in you. He calls you. He calls you his child. He calls us mighty warriors, and he calls us to do the mission. And we must remember that we are who he says we are. Let's say that together. We are who he says we are. Let's change that. I am who he says I am. 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 Let's stand and sing and be ready for the mission.